Hello, everyone. This is our final meeting from Tiny Potato Studios to you. The semester is wrapping up. This is the last time we'll get together, and your final is going to be right at the beginning of finals week, next Monday. So it's been awesome to teach intro psych. I hope you remember the very first day um, when I took attendance, and everything really was just awesome. We had the whole semester in front of us. I was so excited to be back in a big class again, covering a bunch of topics. And now for the last few weeks, I haven't been able to see you, but I just hope that you're on the other end, still getting something out of this, and still learning a lot, and still getting a basic foundation of what the science of psychology has found, and what the science of psychology has yet to do in terms of discovering new knowledge and also growing as a field that pays better and better and more attention to um, empirical findings, data, and questions itself as time goes on. That's really a major theme of this, our very last lecture, because two topics especially with which I have a beef, let's call it, real beef with the psychological establishment are coming up. And that's anger and aggression, as well as altruism, things that the evolutionary psychologists have been very interested in, but which really has had a difficult time upending the conventional wisdom of the establishment for some time. So before I get too far ahead of myself, let's go ahead and get started. The one thing that I want to make sure to say right off the bat is that there is one very, very famous psychological study that's usually put into talks about obedience or talks about conformity, that is not a part of this lecture, and that is the Stanford Prison Study. Why is it not a part of this lecture? Well, you can find out as much as you want about it. It's easy to Google. It's easy to watch. They've made movies and dramatizations about it. But there's two reasons why I like the idea that your book and including this lecture are getting away from going into it in detail. And the first is the Stanford Prison Study was not an experiment. In order to demonstrate phenomena, demonstrate cause and effects, and learn something new, you have to have things set up in such a way that you can control variables, measure them, randomly assign, and have a structure that lets you see what the output is when you put the input in. And the Stanford Prison Study had none of that. It was really a lot like a high school psychology student saying something like, "I wonder what would happen if we put 15 people in the basement," and the answer was, "I don't know, they'll do stuff," but there wasn't enough structure to make conclusions. The other reason is the person who ran this study did so in a way that was basically evil. There's um, no justification in terms of gained knowledge for the experience that he set up for the people who were involved in his study. Um, and he has actually been skating on the fame of this event for decades now, and seems to have really lost sight of the fact that a person who was acting ethically um, would never have come close to doing all the things that he oversaw and promoted and did in the Stanford Prison Study. So I'm not going to talk about the study itself. I just really enjoy talking about why we're not talking about the study. Next is aggression. Aggression and anger are all a part of the same topic. And so I'm going to treat them as a part of the same topic, even though the book focuses solely on aggression. The idea of why it is that we aggress as human beings has a couple of different answers depending on how you think of the question. The book goes into that hormones have a uh, have an effect on who is more aggressive than whom. Heat has an effect on what days involve more aggression than other days. They take a lot of time looking at, a baseline of aggression, either moving up a little bit or moving down a little bit, and seeing what affects the fluctuations. That's never really the bread and butter of what I like to ask. I like to ask deeper questions. I don't like to ask, why does a car go 65 miles an hour sometimes and 63 miles an hour sometimes? I like to ask, why do cars go? So the one answer that has been kind of out there as a placeholder, acceptable theory for a long time, is this idea called the frustration aggression hypothesis. The frustration aggression hypothesis says that you have a goal. That goal has been blocked somehow. It's been frustrated. And that frustration is something that leads to anger.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Or aggression, depending on how you want to think of it. But this frustration is then anger, or revise this theory to say, well, not just anger, but any negative affect, really, any negative emotion, frustration. You just have to feel bad. And then that is something that, if the circumstances are right, will lead you to aggress. So it's basically about not meeting a goal is what causes people to aggress. It's hard for me to say that that is wrong, but here's what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the nature of a satisfying answer to a psychological phenomena actually is. And so let me take a step back from psychology and just talk about mechanics here for a second. This is a diagram of a disc brake, all right? And let's say that I was using this diagram to answer the question, hey, what about brakes? Brakes, what's that about? I could say, hey, you know what? When a brake engages, this thing right here, the piston, moves in, puts pressure on the brake, and so the brake engages. So that's what I would call a piston brake theory. The piston theory of braking is that the last thing to happen before the brake engages is that piston moves in. Ta-da! That is my analogy for what the frustration aggression hypothesis is. Usually, before somebody engages in aggression, they have recently experienced frustration. That's like before braking, the mechanism has recently enjoyed the movement of the piston. But that is the smallest, least satisfying answer for what is brakes that I can really imagine. And it is what I call a proximal explanation. Not just me, that's what it is called, a proximal explanation. It is an explanation that only takes one step back in the causal chain and describes the thing that happened right before that preceded the action or the behavior, the psychological phenomena that you're studying. Okay? So that pressure, that idea that frustration is something, or a negative affect is something that you can measure with biophysical instruments, with blood pressure, with heart rate, with all that kind of stuff, that can give a real interesting scientific neuroscience sheen to it, but you're still just measuring one thing that tends to come before another thing and then calling that connection the entire theory. Okay? Frustration. I didn't get the thing that I wanted. Aggression. I take it out on something. That, maybe if that's really all we had, and that was the best explanation we had, we would still have to run with it. But as an explanation for why aggression, it really, to my mind, falls short. Not because it's wrong, but because it's small. If you wanted to ask, hey, what's up with brakes? You would probably say something along the lines of, brakes are for stopping cars. The reason we've got a brake mechanism in our wheels is because there are sometimes, in order to assure the safety and the proper transportation from point A to point B of a person in a car, it is essential to stop that car. Brakes are the things that do it. And now here's how. Okay? The frustration aggression hypothesis does none of that in trying to explain what's going on with aggression or anger. All right? So here is that alternative that I'd like to give you. I don't want to just say, oh, well, I just want to rag on one theory and not give you anything to replace it. That's, by the way, not really how theories work. A theory is as good as the ability to explain a phenomenon. And if it is the best explanation going, then it deserves to be the top theory. But if another theory comes along and that theory is doing a better, more comprehensive job of predicting and explaining the phenomena, then it might deserve preeminence. What I'm going to introduce to you is something that is not in the book. It flows from game theory and evolutionary thinking, and it is called the recalibrational theory of anger. The recalibrational theory of anger states that the reason we have a mechanism that triggers anger under certain circumstances is to motivate people to engage in the kind of behavior that will recalibrate other people's estimation of the worth of the person who's getting angry. All right, that's a brief overview. I'm going to give you some details here. And I think that the details are best exemplified by a vignette study, a study that was actually done um, to show under what circumstances we get more or less angry. Now, if I asked you, hey, look, somebody has just cheated you, or somebody has just screwed you over, or somebody has just cost you something or taken something from you. Are you angry if they got a lot of money, or are you angry if they didn't get a lot of money? And you might be tempted to think that you'd be angry at that person in the proportion of how much they gained from screwing you over, right? Well, I want them to suffer. I'm going to get more and more angry the more they benefited. And it turns out that's not actually true. That's an artifact of if somebody gains a lot from screwing you over, that usually means they've taken more from you. But if you held constant how much a person cost you, but then varied how much they benefited from that action, you'd realize something a little bit different. So here's the vignette story. And that's why there's a phone, a pay phone, and a bus. This study was run a long time ago before cell phones were ubiquitous. And so the story goes this way. You're at the mall, you're about to catch your bus to come on home, but you've got to make a phone call before you leave, and you don't have a cell phone, you have to use the payphone. You are in line to use the payphone, and as soon as it's your turn and you're about to pick up the receiver, somebody cuts in line, cuts in front of you, grabs the phone, puts their quarter in, and you hear this conversation. Hey, 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 has the trash come yet? Okay, great, awesome. Go out, bring the trash back in. I'll go through it when I get home. I just realized that I must have thrown away my lottery ticket. Yeah, no, I know. It's a winner. It's a winner. It's $5, but it's a winner. Okay, thanks. Bring it all in. I'll go through it when I get home. All right, all right, all right. Bye. And they hang up. During that short conversation, your bus has come and gone, and now you have to wait another hour for the bus to come by again. Now, I want you to think about how angry you are at that person. Here is another version of the vignette that different people got, and then it was measured how angry they were in this situation. Everything's the same. You're still waiting for the phone. You still have to go home. You still need to make your phone call. Somebody cuts in front of you, makes a phone call. Everything's the same except when they tell the other person how much the lottery ticket was worth, it was worth $1,000. So that person is now cut in front of you and made a phone call to save a lottery ticket that was worth $1,000. How angry are you now? If you are a typical person, and this was typified by the data that was in the study, then you're not as angry at somebody who would cut in front of you for $1,000 as you are with somebody who would cut in front of you for $5. And the reason is, in colloquial terms, you can kind of understand how, even though it's important to follow rules and stay in line, $1,000 is a big deal. And that person could still be a normal person who values you, a line stander, in a normal, typical, socially appropriate way, and still, nevertheless, have broken that rule if $1,000 were on the line. However, somebody who doesn't care enough about your right to use the phone, that they would cut in front of you for a $5 benefit to them, is somebody who doesn't really probably value your time as much as is appropriate, because they were willing to take your place in line, cost you time, cost you frustration, for a small benefit to themselves. This ratio of benefit to them and cost to you is what's known as the welfare trade-off ratio. How much of my welfare am I willing to trade off so that you can see a benefit? All right. Essentially, the welfare trade-off ratio is the degree to which you esteem or value or respect the people around you in your life. Somebody with whom you have a long-term committed relationship will have a high welfare trade-off ratio for you. You will put yourself out to do things for them that are sometimes very small, and sometimes you'll put yourself way out for a small benefit just to signal how much you are interested in and value their welfare. However, a person who you don't know at all or very well might have a very low welfare trade-off ratio. You wouldn't be willing to do very much at all to benefit them because eh, you don't really have to. There's no reason, there's no need. Okay? So the recalibrational theory of anger states that these welfare trade-off ratios are always going on, but they are displayed when somebody engages in a behavior. When that behavior is cutting in front of you to use the phone, you get a chance to peek into that person's brain and see what their welfare trade-off ratio towards you might be. If that person only benefits $5, they were willing to impose a big cost on you for a small reward to themselves. That means that they have a low welfare trade-off ratio towards you, and the detection of an unexpectedly low welfare trade-off ratio is what gets our brains rolling in the anger direction. Now, what's going on there? Here's the thing. All of the things that we have a tendency to do when we are angry are things that logically follow from an attempt to renegotiate that welfare trade-off ratio. We might approach the person. We might clarify their behavior. What'd you say? Did you step up to me? These are how angry interactions start. They don't usually just start with somebody coming up and going, whap! Okay? It's usually you begin with the possibility that they are going to change their tune with a little bit of confrontation. So you usually go up, you say, did you see me there? Did you notice that I was waiting in line? And there's a chance that if they didn't or they're willing to apologize, then you've concluded the negotiation and it doesn't have to go any further. But if through conversation, confrontation, threat, argument, things don't change and it's worth it to you to change that person's estimation of how much they ought to respect you, you might choose the route of going for an aggressive act or an aggressive behavior. That is a behavior that is designed to inflict cost on them, and that will demonstrate to them that it is worth their while to treat you with a higher welfare trade-off ratio because you have demonstrated your ability to impose cost upon them if they don't. Now, normally, anger happens in a situation where aggression does not turn out to be necessary. And most of the time, when we have an angry interaction, it's with somebody that we know and that we actually value quite a bit. So those actions don't usually end up in fist fights or punching or anything like that. What we usually tend to do is convince a person that we're angry with that they have a lot to lose by hurting our feelings. That is also something that we do with anger that says, hey, let's talk about our relative value to each other and how I can make your life miserable by doing nothing more than withholding the benefits that I bring into your life. Threaten to walk away, act cool or disinterested. These are all ways of demonstrating that it's a renegotiation, that it's somebody's best interest to treat you better than they just treated you. That, in a more comprehensive sense, is a logic for why under certain circumstances, we might experience all of the hormones and chemicals that come along with the emotion, the negative emotion of frustration, which might lead us into a mental state where we are prepared to do things that we would describe as angry behaviors including aggression. And that is because, under the recalibrational theory, the overall goal of anger is to renegotiate or adjust the welfare trade-off ratio towards you in somebody else's head. Okay? You can affect that welfare trade-off ratio through negotiation, through aggression. And here's the reason this makes so much sense in terms of game theory. If you successfully change somebody else's welfare trade-off ratio so that they respect or more interested in your welfare into the future, that will change their behavior into the future. And you will start to see social, perhaps even material benefits from them that you wouldn't have seen otherwise because of the investment you had during your angry episode. This is how anger can actually pay off and be a good strategy at the individual level. You have tinkered with, fixed, readjusted, recalibrated, tuned up your relationship with someone so that on down the line, they will give you better treatment, and that is great for you. All right, that's a big topic. We've got altruism and leadership and group dynamics left to go, but since that was such a lot to handle right there in the beginning, let's give you a little break and not 7 or 8 minutes worth of light, easy to digest comedy from John Mulaney.
Thank you for coming to this show, by the way. I really do appreciate you coming to a thing because you didn't have to. And it's really easy not to go to things. It is so much easier not to do things than to do them that you would do anything is totally remarkable. Percentage-wise, it is 100% easier not to do things than to do them. And so much fun not to do them, especially when you were supposed to do them. In terms of, like, instant relief, canceling plans is like heroin. It is an amazing feeling. Such instant joy. Kids don't like that. Kids always want to do stuff. Kids get angry. They go, "Oh, we didn't do anything all day." If you ever ask an adult what they did over the weekend and they say they didn't do anything, their faces light up. You're like, "What'd you do this weekend?" I did nothing. I did nothing at all. Did we do anything? No, I didn't do anything. People especially don't want to do their jobs. I've found that out recently, too. I have a friend named Megan. She's an elementary school teacher, and I was out with her one night, and she was drinking like a monster. And I said to her, "Don't you have to do a shift at school tomorrow?" And she went, "I'll just show a video." And I was like, "That's why teachers show videos?" She said this, she goes, "Yeah, I don't want to work." And I was like, "You know, the kids don't want to work either." And she was like, "Good." I really do. I was psyched to do it in New York. I'm really happy to live here and was glad that we could do it in New York City. And I'm not sure how you all got here tonight, but I did want to say this. I've never been killed by hitmen, so I don't know what it's like in the moments just before you're killed by hitmen. But I bet it's not unlike when you're on the subway and you realize that a mariachi band is about to start playing. Just that brief moment where you're reading and you're like, "Oh, a guitar player. Oh, another guitar player. No, an accordion player. Oh, no. This is the loudest thing in the world." I was really excited. A lot of people showed up. They told me that it was a big theater, and I thought that no one would come, so thank you for coming. I wanted to, like, take ads out in the paper, or, like, do something to a tot so I get in the New York Post or something. The New York Post is my favorite newspaper. I think it's great. I read it every day. I like reading the New York Post because reading the New York Post is like talking to someone who heard the news, and now they're trying to give you the gist. It's like you get the same amount of information if you grab someone on the street and you were like, "What happened today?" And they're like, "It's a perv in Queens." You'd be like, "All right, thank you." Or rather, it's like someone read a better newspaper and now they're trying to text you everything they can remember. Doesn't have to be right, just has to be short. I really do love the Post. I read it a lot, and there's a a hierarchy in the New York Post, different people that they like and different people that they don't like. And if you pay attention, you can start to identify some of the New York Post rankings that they have. The number one thing that you can be in the eyes of the New York Post is an angel. An angel is a child who has died. That is the best thing that you can be in the eyes of the New York Post. The less amount of time you live, the better in the eyes of the Post. After that, under an angel is a hero. A hero is any man who does his job. You'll a lot of times see headlines that are like, hero tutor teaches after school. And you're like, yeah. Down towards the bottom of the spectrum, there are pervs. Pervs touch tots. Tots are angels who haven't died yet. There are no children in the eyes of the New York Post. You're either a tot or you're dead and you're an angel. I did leave one out, sorry. Above perv is a bozo. A bozo is any man who cheats on his wife. That guy's a bozo. I remember seeing a headline when Tiger Woods cheated on his wife, and it says, Tiger says he's sorry, but Elin says, beat it, bozo. No, she did not. She is from another country. And even if she was from this country, no one has said bozo in 1,000 years. Who was your source on that, New York Post? Some tiny old lady that chain smokes all day long? They met her in a parking garage, and they were like, Madge, give us the scoop. What did Elin say to Tiger? She told him to beat it, bozo. I'm feeling good tonight, though. I got a massage recently. Went to a spa to get a massage. I went into the room to get the massage, and the woman there told me to undress to my comfort level. Those were her words. She said, I'm going to leave the room. You undress to your comfort level. So I put on a sweater and a pair of corduroy pants, and I felt safe. I'm trying to, in general, take better care of myself. I'm trying to stop smoking. I've smoked since I was 13 years old. I started when I was 13 years old because I stole 2 cigarettes from my older sister, and I hid them in a shoebox under my bed with a copy of Cosmopolitan magazine. And one day, my mom cleaned under my bed, and she found the shoebox. I came home from school, and my mom was standing there holding it, and she said, Hey, mister, I found your treasure. And I never liked the way she phrased that, because that made me sound like the world's lamest pirate, like a guy whose treasure chest is 2 cigarettes and a woman's magazine. And my dad came home from work, and my mom told my dad that she had cleaned under my bed and found a shoebox with 2 cigarettes and a Cosmopolitan, which prompted my dad to ask, how does John know how to make a Cosmopolitan? I'm trying to eat better. I was out to lunch with a friend, and I got a chicken sandwich. And the waitress said to me, oh, you're getting a chicken sandwich. Well, that comes with a choice of either salad or fries. Those were the choices, salad or fries, the 2 most different foods in the universe. That's like saying, what kind of day do you want to have? Do you want to be active and go to the bathroom or stuff, or do you want to lay on the floor moaning? Oh, you're getting a chicken sandwich? Well, with that, you can either go for a jog or smoke crack cocaine. Oh, well... If I got a plate of crack for the table, would you have some? You'd have crack if I got a plate of crack? Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll take an order of crack. Sometimes, when people order fries, they act like it's a little adventure. They'll be like, should we get a plate of fries for the table? Should we do it? Should we share some fries? They gotta make sure that everyone's on board with it. It's like, if I get fries, you'll have a couple, right? If I get fries for the table, I know you'll have fries if I get fries. Should we do it? Yeah, let's be bad. Come on, let's do it. All right, we're gonna take a plate of fries. It's like a group of couples agreeing to do ecstasy together.
All right, next. Altruism. Altruism isn't really such a hard one, okay? Nevertheless, the book throws a couple of traditional theories about altruism, skips along the surface, goes for a couple of proximate explanations, despite the fact that there is a deep literature about the logic of altruism that is just waiting for them to mention. Now, maybe it's because it's an introductory psych textbook and you don't want to get too deep, but it's a great and fun topic. So let's go into it just a little bit. They start off with this idea of the cost-reward theory of altruism. And it's really interesting to hear them talk about the cost reward theory because they talk about A, how much it would cost you to help somebody and how much it would benefit them if you went ahead with that little cost. What does that sound like? That's a welfare trade off ratio. How much of your welfare are you willing to trade off to create a benefit for somebody else? If you value somebody even a little bit, you will engage in behavior that doesn't cost you very much, but generates huge benefits for them. If you don't know them very much, you might not. And if the effort is very high or the cost is very high for you, you're less likely to do it because it all happens in that ratio. So this makes a lot of sense based on what we just talked about, but they don't go into a lot of exploration as to what the underlying logic or theory would be. The cost to you, to the person doing the altruism that they propose, is the idea that seeing somebody in pain or seeing somebody struggle hurts you because it makes you anxious to watch the suffering of somebody else. That's kind of a way to weasel around this cost benefit thing. But there's a better explanation right now, which is that if you do a behavior that generates a huge benefit for somebody else, you have set that person up for a long term, maybe even one more round of interaction exchange in which they are likely to treat you very well because you've done a really nice thing for them. Okay, this is a great investment in other people, especially if it's easy for you to help, and especially if you generate a huge benefit for them. That's a huge investment in another person that can pretty reliably come back to you in ways small or large. Okay, you don't have to hit the jackpot and save a millionaire and get $100,000. But if you do something very, very easy, like pull somebody out of a lake and they buy you lunch, would you get a free lunch just for going like this? Yeah, that's a great deal. You win. They win, win, win. Okay. So there is this idea that altruism is not just about the moment, but altruism is about what you can expect to happen in the future based on your decisions in that moment. We're going to take a little bit of a sidestep here to follow the logic of the book, but then we're going to get back to that idea that altruism is about not the present, but the future. There's this thing called the bystander effect. And the bystander effect, by the way, used to be illustrated by this famous story about a woman named Kitty Genovese. And Kitty Genovese was a person who was stabbed on the front porch of her apartment building in New York, Brooklyn, I can't quite remember, and died there while 15 people from the windows watched, and nobody came out to help because it was an uncaring world and everybody assumed that somebody else had called the police. That turns out to have been an exaggeration of that story. That story is not true in the way that would demonstrate the bystander effect. So we don't really cover it anymore, but it's a famous story. The bystander effect, though, illustrated by that old incorrect story, is that the more people you have around somebody who needs help, perversely, there is a chance that the likelihood of anybody helping goes down. So that if you break your leg, it might be better to only have one other person around than to have 12 people around. And there are three reasons for that. Okay. In order for somebody to offer help, they have to do three things. They have to notice that help is necessary. They have to interpret the situation as something in which their help would in fact help. And then they have to be the one person that takes responsibility for being the helper. When you are in a group and are a potential helper, other people around interfere with that process at all 3 points. In order to notice the person who needs help, we might reference the attentional focus of other people. If they are not paying attention to that person, you will have a tendency not to pay attention to that person either. And the other person, people around might even be distracting. You might be focusing on them and trying to navigate through a crowd and not even look down and find the person who is needing help because they broke their leg. One of the biggest things, though, is this idea of interpretation. Interpreting something as an emergency that requires action is sometimes a difficult thing to do when we are in the context of other people. And that is for two reasons. One is plural ignorance. Plural ignorance is the phenomena that happens when you start referencing the reactions of other people to try to figure out whether you should react. You don't know that something is an emergency. You're trying to figure it out. But here's the thing. If it is an emergency, other people are also going to be looking around and trying to figure out whether it's an emergency. And if they're trying to figure out what you're thinking and you're trying to figure out what they're thinking, you both look calm. You both are not taking action and you're both giving each other the impression that you don't have to intervene. That then multiplies itself to the point where everybody thinks everybody else is cool with what's going on, even though they're all kind of in the inside panicking that somebody might need to do something. The other reason that that takes hold is this thing called the illusion of transparency. We think other people know that we are having doubt about whether this is an emergency. We're thinking that person might need help. I wonder if these other people agree with me. But while we think people know that we're having conflict, from the outside, they don't. We look confident that there's nothing to be done because we're doing nothing. And that leads everybody to misinterpret the information in the situation as not a big deal. That prevents people from taking responsibility. So the thing is, even if everybody knew something needed to happen, somebody needed to help, choosing who in that group is going to be the one person to step forward and do the helping is a coordination problem that's hard to solve between strangers. Nobody knows who would be the best person to help. Nobody knows if they would be the best person to help. And that is called diffusion of responsibility. Okay? So if one person needs to be responsible, but nobody can figure out who that person is, nobody takes responsibility, and that responsibility diffuses among the group. One way to get rid of diffusion of responsibility is if one person was clearly qualified, marked in some way as the logical intervener in the situation. If somebody in that group of people looking at somebody with a broken leg is wearing scrubs, everybody's gonna be like, that's the person who really ought to be stepping up. The diffusion of responsibility effect would probably go away and that person would end up taking responsibility. Okay, so that's the bystander effect. Let's get back to altruism. Altruism and evolution come up in one paragraph in the book, where the paragraph says evolution has a really hard time with the idea of altruism because, of course, any altruistic organism would be putting itself out for no benefit and would lose the game of evolution because they weren't selfish enough. But we have now discovered this new thing, which wasn't new, it was in the late 60s, early 70s, called kin altruism, which is that it certainly pays to be nice to other people who have your genes in them, your kin, because that can pay off for the gene. All right, great. We've come a long, long way since then. Let me explain to you a little bit about why it makes sense that putting yourself out at the beginning of a relationship might be a fabulous way to help yourself. And I hinted at this earlier, but let's do it mathematically. There's this game called the prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma is usually set up, well, it's set up like this, like we have here in the chart. But the story that goes along with it, why it's called prisoner's dilemma, is that let's say that Sherlock Holmes has arrested two people. And those two people were conspirators together in a crime, but Holmes can't prove it. What he needs to do then is to interview in isolation both of the prisoners and see if they can get either one of those prisoners to give up the evidence or testify against the other prisoner. That prisoner then comes in a dilemma if the payoffs are this. Here's the thing. If person one and person two both choose option A, which is to keep your mouth shut, not testify, not give up your other partner, then they will get a certain benefit. Neither one of them will get convicted of the big crime. That translates in this payoff structure to getting $5 out of the game. But here's the thing. If person one chooses B, which is to testify or defect or betray their partner, but their partner doesn't betray them, then person B is going to get twice as much money as they had before, and person A is going to lose the $5 they otherwise would have gotten. So here's the thing. If you are person one and person two is going to be cooperating, is going to be holding their tongue, is going to be making sure that they don't betray you, then you have a choice between getting $5 or getting $10. Pretty good choice, right? You'll get twice as much money if you betray your friend. The same thing goes for person two. If you both keep your mouth shut, you'll get $5. But if person two decides to go ahead and betray their friend, they could get $10 while their friend gets screwed over for $10. Okay, that is $10 less than they otherwise would have had. What that means is on the level of decision making for each one of these people, the better outcome is to screw over their partner. No matter what their partner does, if they screw them over, if they turn them in, they will get more money than if they kept their mouth shut. What that means is that both of them will probably betray the other. They'll both speak up, they'll both testify, and that means they'll both avoid getting screwed out of $5, but they'll end up with nothing. Okay? So, in the prisoner version of this, keeping your mouth shut gets everybody charged on a lesser charge and they go to jail. If you sing on your partner, they go to jail for a long time, but you get a really light sentence. You get the best possible outcome. And if you sing on each other, then you get a heavy sentence, but not as bad as if you kept your mouth shut and somebody snitched on you. All right? What ends up happening then is that two rational actors, two people who are doing the logical thing, end up with the worst possible outcome between the two of them. If you add up the money you get here, it's no money. If you add up the money you get here, it's $10. If you add up the money here where one person cooperates and another person doesn't cooperate, it's $5. So the best result for the pair, for the two of them, is if they both kept their mouths shut, they both cooperated, they both got $5, and they walked away as a pair with $10. But what actually happens is that nobody gets anything. All right, that's Prisoner's Dilemma. It's a big, long setup. But here's the thing. If you are only ever going to meet that person one time, then there's no getting around the logic that you should choose B. You should betray. You should not backstab. You should screw over, okay? But if you are going to be seeing person two again and again and again and again, it would actually be to your best interest, it'd be to your benefit to establish a pattern where you are a choose A-er and they can then respond with being a choose A-er as well. And you can have iteration after iteration after iteration of game where you both get a better outcome. That is the iterated Prisoner's Dilemma, and the best strategy that you can use to play that iterated Prisoner's Dilemma game is a thing called tit for tat. It is an exceedingly simple strategy. It doesn't require a lot of programming. And it says this: be nice. Start off with a cooperative move. If the other person cooperates, you cooperate back. If the other person defects or betrays, you betray back. And whatever that person did last is what you do next. So here's the situation. You, as the person playing tit for tat, cooperate. Play option A. If that other person defects or turns you in or backstabs you, then the next thing you do is just translate that decision into your next move. And the next time you play, you defect, you backstab. If they say, oh, man, I didn't realize you were a cooperator. I thought you were a jerk. No, let's do this. And they cooperate on the second round, despite the fact that you've now stabbed them back. You will do this thing which we as human beings would describe as forgive. You copy their last move and you cooperate on the third round. Now, that didn't involve any emotion, any ideology, any religion at all. That was simply copying the last move. But if you cooperate with somebody after they defected on you because they cooperated with you back, that looks like forgiveness. If they then defect, you defect back. That looks like revenge or retaliation. And then it goes on like that. If they continue to defect, you won't get taken advantage of. But if they signal, okay, all right, I give, I'll cooperate, then you immediately cooperate back. And if you do this long enough, people will realize that over the long term, if you've got a long history that you're looking forward to together, the best thing you can do is to signal cooperation to another person so that they will cooperate back with you. You can each get $5 per round and not go for the $10 per round where you'd actually get no bucks per round. All right. So once you start talking about altruism in the context of a potential long-term relationship, you realize that on the first meeting, when you've just seen each other, settling for a $5 payoff and mutual cooperation is a better move than going for a $10 backstab and betrayal of that person. That is, in a sense, actually in a very real sense, in a game theory sense, an act of altruism. Altruism does not necessarily mean that you have lost money or taken something that you used to have and destroyed it or given it away. Altruism is simply foregoing the best outcome you could have had, the most beneficial, the most money outcome you could have had, for another lesser outcome in a way that also increases the benefit to somebody else. All right. So if there's $20 bills laying down on the ground and you take 19, but you leave $1 for somebody else who is walking around, that was an act of altruism, even though you just got 19 bucks. You could have gotten 20. Okay. So there is a sense, and I like saying this, that every time you walk by somebody that you could mug and don't, it is, in a sense, an act of altruism. You could have had their money, but you decided not to. And so you move on. We're all engaging in small acts of altruism by letting people go about their day, and it makes the world go round. All right? So here's the thing. In an iterated prisoner's dilemma, and a repeated prisoner's dilemma game, you're certain to have a first meeting with somebody, but you might have more meetings. Any meeting could be your last. You don't know, but there's a good chance that if you meet somebody, you will meet them again. And here's where your decision comes in. Is it best to assume that you won't meet them again and go ahead and try to stab them in the back? Or is it best to assume that you might meet them again? And so it's going to be good to have signaled cooperation in order to get it back on the next round. What turns out when you run these kind of situations in a simulator or even in experiments, the best move is to be nice to somebody and do something altruistic right off the bat. Because if you're wrong and you've run into a defector, you've run into a jerk, you run into a backstabber, you will lose a little bit on that interaction because you put yourself out there being nice. It'll feel bad. You'll feel like a sucker. You'll feel betrayed. But you'll know that you're done with that person. You don't have to interact with them again, and you can protect yourself from there on out. However, if you start off as a defector, if you start off as a backstabber, then you have now foregone the possibility that that person could have been a lifetime, lifelong cooperative partner. And if you've lost out on 30 rounds of benefits because you took an extra $5 on the first round, you screwed yourself. So that's how the math actually works out. And it's why altruism is a good evolutionary strategy in the context of a species that has a lot of interactions with people over the course of their lifetimes, a social species that tends to live in small groups like human beings. So it is a part of our psychology, a beneficial part of our psychology, to treat other people in such a way as we will put in the bank, in a sense, a certain amount of goodwill to be reaped later on. And people who do that are much better off than people who just go around pissing everybody off at every chance because they're selfish. All right, so that's altruism. Now we have a couple of things to talk about when it comes to group dynamics. There is a pair of phenomena, social facilitation and social interference, which both seem to occur in the same situations. People have a tendency to do tasks better when they are in the presence of or being observed by other people. That is called social facilitation. And the interesting thing is birds, ants, cockroaches, mice, hey, they all have this phenomena too. When there are other mice or other cockroaches or other ants or other birds watching, a certain task that that animal is good at becomes faster and more efficient and better when there are observers. Here's another thing. People do worse in the presence of others. That's called social interference. Social interference is also observed in birds and ants and cockroaches. And wait a second. What is actually happening? Well, here's the deal. Sometimes you get better and faster and more efficient at a task with observers, and sometimes you get worse at a task with observers. So the thing that the psychologists had to figure out was, what is the difference between those two situations, when other people would help and a situation where other people would hurt? And Robert Zajonc, that's how you pronounce Zajonc, Science, said other people will give you, at the very least, not an unbearable amount, but a certain amount of anxiety. When people are watching you do a task, it gives you arousal and anxiety, okay? That arousal will make your reactions, your entire system, a more intense system. But it will also have a tendency to reduce your ability to inhibit and reduce your executive function. So you're kind of like a hard charging, revved up engine, but you've lost a lot of the subtleties of control. That kind of effect will have different outcomes depending on the kind of task that you are trying to do. People used to think that easy tasks were facilitated by onlookers and hard tasks were not. That's not necessarily the case. The thing is, tasks that involve doing a thing that you don't have to think about, that you've got trained, that you use repetitively, that you do over and over, that you don't have to inhibit, that you don't have to stop yourself from doing, will get better with that anxiety and that arousal. So when your default response, let's say you're running, the default response when you're running is to put another foot in front of you. There's not a lot of thought there. There might be technique, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that running isn't something that takes a certain amount of skill, but there's never a time in running when you're like, oh, I should not do that. You should just keep doing the same thing, but do it over and over. So when the dominant response is the right one, anxiety is going to be a help for you. But if the dominant response is something that you might need to question, you might need to second guess yourself, you might need to think ahead, like in a game of chess, you don't want to just look at the first piece and say, oh man, queens are really powerful, I should move that. You need to inhibit 3,000 moves in favor of the one move that you think is actually most likely 15 moves down the line to be part of a winning strategy. You have to basically, as a chess player, say no, 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 yes. That involves executive function, that involves inhibition, and that's the kind of thing that gets turned off when you have the anxiety and the arousal of onlookers. So, a task that involves repeating a prepotent or a prepared or a ready response gets social facilitation. A task where you have to do a lot of executive function, a lot of inhibition, where you have to restrain your impulses and do something different a lot, that's going to give you social interference. All of those things, by the way, are different from social loafing. Social facilitation and social interference are about the performance of an individual in the context of observers who are just looking at them do their task. Social loafing, on the other hand, is the context of somebody who is doing a task with other people who are also engaged in the task. Social loafing is when people's effort towards a task goes down when other people are also doing the task with them. And this tends to happen in contexts where the task is additive. That is to say, everybody's effort gets added to the success in the task in an even way, and the task is more successful the more people have added to that task. A good example of an additive task is tug of war. Every person is pulling with a certain amount of force on that rope, and the addition of all those forces is the result of that group's effort. All right? But here's the other thing about tug of war. The entire team either wins or the entire team loses. So if everybody's getting an equal payout for the success or failure of the task and not being apportioned rewards based on their effort, then you will have a situation that is ripe for social loafing. That is to say, if you are being evaluated alone, you will put in a lot of effort because you have been identified with your effort and can be rewarded accordingly. But if you're evaluated as a group, there will be lower effort. And that difference between a high effort and low effort in these situations is known as social loafing. Dr. Hart, if you're interested in this topic, he studies this. And I'm sure that when he teaches 202, he gets a lot more information out to the people who are being taught in that class. All right. The very last slide we have here, and I'm doing this because we are at CNU. CNU is big on the concept of leadership. We have the leadership program, we have the leadership minor, we have people in leadership faculty positions. And so the book tells a little bit about different styles of leadership. The first style of leadership that the book talks about is this idea of the task-oriented leader. The task-oriented leader is a taskmaster. They give orders. They do not enjoy a lot of process. They do not have a lot of discussion. Nobody else's opinion is really worth anything except for theirs. They do not tend to be popular leaders. Effective, that's up in the air. But popular, no. People do not tend to like them. They treat people as if they are cogs in a machine that they are running. On the other hand, a relationship-oriented leader is someone who is still in charge. They're still making decisions. They are still in charge of discipline. They are still in charge of making sure that the group meets their goal. However, in that process, they take feedback, they listen, they value the people that they are working with. They care about their emotions. They care about their experiences. And they are generally liked by the people that are working for them, even if they are worked hard and even if there is occasionally need for discipline or punishment. Two other minor leadership styles that are still relevant, so I want to mention them, is the transactional leader. The transactional leader is basically engaging in a negotiation with everybody on their team. And the point is to do what the leader wants. Not necessarily a goal that the whole task has been assigned to, but to glorify the leader, to make the leader feel good about themselves. And so the leader is engaged in a process by which everybody who does something that makes the leader feel good gets goodness in return. And everybody who does something that makes the leader feel bad gets punished for their actions, even if it was probably in line with what ought to have been the goal of the group. On the opposite of that is the transformational leader or the charismatic leader. This is a leader who shares and gets everyone in their group invested in some very large, not like specific goal. It's bigger than a goal. It's a vision. It's a large scale projection of existence that is different from how people are existing then. The transformational leader can then inspire people to do their own sub goals, have their own effort, and carry forth the mission even when the transformational leader is gone. That gets us to the end, not just of today, not just of the chapter, but of the entire semester and of the entire class. I wish I could be there with you. I wish we could get some idea about how it went. I wish I could see your faces. But alas, that's not really going to happen this semester. I hope it happens next semester. Your task from here on out now is to study hard. There are going to be 35 questions on this exam from chapter 14. That study guide is going to be up by the end of Friday. There are 67 questions total on the exam. That means more than half of it is from chapter 14, but there are more questions than usual. There are 17 more questions than we typically have on an exam. It's comprehensive. Those questions that are not from chapter 14 are going to be randomly selected from questions that we've had on tests before. The test is going to be worth 200 points as opposed to 150, and we get started online on the Scholar page in the Take Tests Here bar at 5 o'clock on Monday evening, and it will run for 2.5 hours, plenty of time, until 7:30. All right? Take care. Have the best summer possible. I hope that you will come by and see me when the fall comes. But if I don't see you again, do well. I hope you've enjoyed the semester, and at least maybe you'll have some fun.
And I needed a haircut before this shit went down, and now crazy. It's like the Beast, Beauty and the Beast. That's some hair, man. I'm gonna catch up with Niehaus eventually.